There's a fine line between being diligent and persevering and being delusional or being an asshole. Once you accept that every human being isn't going to like your stuff, you're free. I came to Marvel at a point when Marvel was at a boring stage artistically. Every time I tried to do something, they went, you can't. So I can't do panels that overlap. I can't have appendages come out of panels. Why? I said, break the rules and make it look cool. And guess what? It made my career.
Todd's a visionary. He could see what people wanted, regardless of what others were telling him that people wanted, and 10 times out of 10, he was right.
But then the ones that go that cuts across?
Todd is one of those one-of-a-kind creators that comes across every generation or so that kind of redefines the game.
If you look at Todd's career, getting to tell his story his way, it's the lighthouse in the distance.
When Todd's run of Spider-Man hit, it hit like a bomb. No one was doing what Todd was doing.
It didn't matter how much he was abstracting from the figures, because he was guiding your eye into the story and giving you this sense, like when you open the page, that those characters were literally just punching you in the jaw, not each other in the jaw.
I cannot wait to get the next Todd McFarlane book. It wasn't just Spider-Man, it was the next Todd McFarlane book.
He likes the idea of a challenge. It motivates him when he sees something in his way that says, you can't do this.
That's how Todd lives his life. What is the status quo? I don't care. This is where it's going to go.
He was a believer in himself as an artist. He was a believer in Spawn.
When the first issue of Spawn came out, it was a game changer. Production values were higher, the paper quality was better, and it was Todd McFarlane, his own character, the way he wanted to do it.
You get these amazingly rich, just vibrantly sick characters and images and worlds and landscapes. It's Todd's brain, and he wants to make that happen.
Todd did for toys what he did for comics. He came in and he brought extra detail, more devotion to how the toys actually look.
Todd helped reinvent comics and toys. Name another person who's had the impact on comics and toys that Todd McFarlane has.
He takes that into film and television. This is insane.
That guy literally came from nowhere, out of nowhere, and built everything. He did it all on his own, strictly by just sheer force of will.
Love it, like it, loathe it, whatever it is, you have to have respect for it. And you have to have respect for the journey that he's taken to get to issue 300 of his own superhero, supernatural story.
The history that we're making is that 300 ties the record for the longest running creator-owned comic book ever. For me, it's been a 27-year journey. There is no shortcut to get to 300 issues of a comic book. So, I don't drink coffee, don't drink tea, don't drink alcohol. I need my water for my pens so they don't get clogged. I think there's lots of great artists never worried about anatomy being 100% accurate. As long as you're in the ballpark, people go for the ride because then you get a style. So these pods here are going to convey his muscles here. There's lots of people who draw way better anatomy than I do, right? Greg Capullo, Mark Silvestri, Jim Lee. I mean, they draw circles around my anatomy. So what helped keep me in that pool? Whenever I had a character, I went, how can we make them as interesting on the page at key moments? So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 money pages. You sort of build up and you go back and you build up and you go back. And then this would be Spawn and his cowl. When I knew I was getting to one of those moments, I intentionally made the previous page bland. I was just lulling the reader into, oh, okay, this is nice and something's gonna happen, and then there's a visual. Should be something fairly big and dynamic. That's why most people know 2 lines of 1,000 songs, because they remember those moments. If I can get 3 or 4 moments in a comic book, out of 20 pages, I've done my work. I was the proverbial best artist in the class since I was 5. I was an incessant doodler. I was that kid that every time somebody had to be drawn on the chalkboard, they'd go, Todd, can you come draw a horse? I bought my first comic at 16. I just went, I got smitten real fast. Comic books, you just get to come up with crazy stuff. So I went, hey, I'm gonna teach myself this style. And I was collecting comic books. I was a comic book fiend. I was thinking, oh, it'd be cool if you get in a comic book. I was starting to try and teach myself, but you know, it all happens in New York. I'm a Canadian, you know, it's never gonna happen. And then I'm flipping through the channels, and one of the channels is a public broadcast. And on this grainy show, somebody's holding up a comic book page. I went, whoa, comic books. And then it got better. The page they were holding up was from the Uncanny X-Men. The guy holding it is John Byrne, the artist. And then he says the magic words. I live here in Calgary. The guy who draws the best-selling comic book lived in the same city I did as a Canadian kid? That was the moment. I went, wow, if he can live in Calgary, then it's doable. And I put my head down, that was it. So it looks like I'm doing really good. Whoa.
Yeah. Lovely. I think they forgot about him for a second. That's so great.
I met Todd at a baseball park. He was a groundskeeper for a Major League Baseball team in Calgary, Alberta.
Ran into her a couple of times because I was working at a ballpark or whatever, and I get smitten pretty quick.
Well, he's very handsome. I pretty much fell head over heels right away. One of the things that drew me to Todd was his energy and his sense of humor. He's a storyteller.
I love you, and happy sweet 16th birthday.
Todd would write love letters and poems for me. In the letters, he would sketch something, even on the envelope or in the letter. And I remember right from the beginning just being blown away by what he could do. He can be very, very energetic, like at a comic book convention. He's friendly and he's smiling and he's greeting people and he's jumping over the table to take pictures with people. He is on. Todd's a bit of a contradiction, though. In some ways, he's like very funny and very playful, but then he can turn around and be very serious and very intense. He has this ability to just go through walls and never give up and never take no for an answer. Keeping him in balance is a full-time job.
My dad was one of the hardest working people I ever saw. He was just a blue-collar grinder who was honest and fair. And yet, there were times when people took advantage of my dad. As a kid, I thought my dad allowed them to take advantage of me. And it shaped me because early on I said, I want to be just like my dad, except, comma, I'm going to fight back. I'm not going to get pushed around. I was in the state of Washington. I don't have baseball programs in Canada, and I want to play baseball. My day routine, get up, play baseball, go to school, have a 3-hour janitor job, go to my second baseball practice, go home to the trailer I lived in, do my homework, and then at about midnight pull out a blank piece of paper and do my samples. And then I would send them to every company, not just Marvel, not just DC. There was First Comics, there was Eclipse Comics, there's Pacific Comics. If they existed, I found out who the editors were, and I'd send them off to 35 of these people, and I'd sit back and I'd wait. And I did that for years. I got 300 rejection letters. I'm walking home from practice one day. Wanda's standing, I can still see her. And as I get close, she yells to me, and she says,
Who's Steve Englehart?
he wants you to call him back. One of the things I wanted to do was to do something big and do something special with it. For 300, I wanted to do my oh my gosh issue. Who's gonna look at this and not go, oh my gosh, look at all of that, and that's not even color.
Cover to cover, it's 76 pages. It's a big deal to be part of this big milestone in Spawn's history. Some of the challenges that we've had to try to make this issue, coordinating a lot of artistic talent.
Jason Sean Alexander, who's my study artist, his style is super cool. Jerome Payne is only doing a couple pages, but great cover. J. Scott Campbell is a very famous cover artist. What would be awesome is if I could say that you're not only doing a cover, you're doing pages on the inside. The home run would be, could I get Greg Capullo to come back? He's done more issues of Spawn than anybody. I go, man, if I could just bring him back just for one last encore.
So it wasn't between contracts. I'm in the thick of it. Oh, I says, you're going to have to let me go and do this because it's Spawn 300 and I did so much of Spawn and this landmark thing and it's history making, and they understood the magnitude of what Todd has achieved here, why I should be a part of that. And that's good because I would have went and done it anyway.
So I'm walking home from practice one day. Wanda's standing, I can still see her, 4 steps up to get into the trailer. And as I get close, she yells to me, who's Steve Englehart? And I went, Steve Englehart? He's a comic book guy. He just phoned. He wants you to call him back. And I phoned him, and he offered me a job. And boom, I'm in comic book. The samples specifically were this character called Coyote. They gave him to Steve Englehart. Steve Englehart didn't need somebody to draw Coyote. He needed somebody to draw a backup story. And about halfway through it in my second issue, they said, we're canceling the book. It took years to get into the business. I now basically am unemployed 4 months later. Every now and then there are these forks in the road, and the fork is really called the Dumb Luck Fork. Infinity Incorporated, the artist of that book died. It left an opening, I get hired. And then all of a sudden Bob Harris says, I got this other book, The Hulk. You want to try and draw it? That's the moment when I became the artist. Marvel then says to me, and what I heard, make it boring. This is what we do. We do boring layouts now. And we clash artistically.
Todd started out as someone that was rising up through the ranks that wasn't embraced by the people running Marvel at the time.
You couldn't hold Todd down. That was probably a big frustration for a lot of people at Marvel.
Big, ballsy, energetic stuff resonates. That's why Jack Kirby was so great. It just jumped off the page.
And this was happening with someone who was very young and working for a huge corporation that was paying his paychecks. And still he was going, no, this is how you do it.
As much as sometimes upper management was complaining, the readers were rejoicing. And Hulk just catapulted me even further. Okay, how do I, Todd McFarlane, assert myself in the sea of artists that do comic books? You want to take the books that nobody's paying attention to, take those over and prop them up, and all of a sudden people go, oh my gosh. Spider-Man was now starting to fall down the sales charts. They warned me to stay away from the Spidey office, so I marched into that office, and they were right because it was a mess. If I was going to draw it the exact same way and repeat what was not working, that would be a fool's errand.
Todd got pushback on pretty much everything. But that's what happens when you're a visionary.
Jim Sauerkraut was my editor, and he was, to this day, the best editor I ever had. He just said, don't draw something just because you're just drawing it. Have a purpose for it. He didn't care whether it was a right or wrong. He just wanted to know that I wasn't doing it arbitrarily. The first thing he said to me was, what's with the webbings? Spider-Man's been around now for 297 issues. This is not how the webbings look. What are you doing? You could not take Spider-Man's webbing and shoot it towards camera. Up to that point, from my perspective, artistically, they were doing Spider-Man, emphasis on man. When I took it, I went, oh no, it's gonna be Spider-Man. I didn't care about the man. And so I just came up with this thing that to me was just almost like frayed rope that just went as it was shooting, and I could shoot it in every direction and, more importantly, towards camera. So he goes, all right, you got a reason for it. You went for it.
The webbing, you always wondered, why does it look like that? And Todd was like, it wouldn't.
I don't know if they ever let him do it his way. I think you just had more old-timers, people from previous generations that knew how comics were created in yesteryear.
Every time I tried to do something, they went, you can't. When they told me to stop doing the stuff on Spider-Man, I just said yes, and I kept doing it, right? Who's that crazy 22-year-old?
Todd had no fear, ever. And as long as it translated into sales, suddenly the memos came out corporate. Let Todd do what he wants.
Got me in trouble, and it broke some of the iconic looks of it. Ended up being things that the fans liked. I got to the point where I wanted to start writing. So I quit. They came back to me and they went, whoa, Todd, don't overreact here. There's 3 Spider-Man books. What if we created a new book and we gave you your own book? Do I get to write it? Yeah. You're gonna give me a #1 Spider-Man issue, and I've never written a thing in my life. I think you guys are crazy, but I'm in.
When Todd's run of Spider-Man hit, the reaction was pretty spectacular.
And that thing just stood out from a mile away on the shelves.
First issue of Todd's Spider-Man series sold 2.5 million copies. At that point, it was the biggest selling comic ever.
Spider-Man's is the #1 selling book that I'm writing pencil and ink in. It had just set some record, and yet it wasn't good enough for Marvel. They started saying, Todd, you gotta change the stories, you gotta change the tonality of it. Maybe start going back and putting Spider-Man a little bit more classic and I thought it was just absurd.
They didn't want the artist to shine. They wanted Spider-Man to shine. They didn't want Todd to shine. You know, Marvel was making all kinds of money off of the backs of people that were creating all these properties for them and creating these stories for them, the writers or artists. The wheels were already turning about, look at the sales on Spider-Man. Spider-Man's been around since the 60s, and suddenly it's selling, you know, 1 million copies. Why is that? It's because of me.
So at the end of 299, which is where we're picking up, Spawn grabs the angel. So we'll just start right there, and then we'll get a reaction of the guy he's grabbing. He didn't have any eyes, so it's going to be a little bit tough.
It's a very ambitious issue. I mean, Todd's been drawing every single second that he has been able to.
And so I'll scribble all this out, and I literally can go in with my inking tool and go straight into this.
Penciling is here's the shapes and here's the dynamics of it and here's whatever. What inking does is it three-dimensionalizes these figures on the page.
He will ink in the car, he will ink when he's in a meeting, he will ink on the floor if he has to.
When people see this, they'll be horrified, going, what? I thought he had 300 all figured out, buttoned up.
The size of this book is triple size issues. It's not going to be an easy feat.
I thought it was absurd that they gave me the task to get Spider-Man sales up. I get the sales to arguably the highest that anybody at that point was doing and set records. And yet it still wasn't good enough. Rob, Eric, and I, we were having these conversations, and then the conversation after a while was the what if. What if all of us did our own books and we did them in the same place? Nobody has done that yet. We go to New York to basically say we're quitting, we're leaving, we're going to start our own brand. And while we're in New York to have that meeting, I accidentally bump into Jim Lee and Mark Silvestri.
Todd saw me in the lobby of the hotel, and he came up to me and said, Bud, I think we need to have a conversation. And the plan was just to get as many people together, and we're going to start our own empire. We're going to own everything. Everything you create is yours.
He wasn't spearheading this effort. I don't know if I would have left.
I conned them, or sales pitched them, whichever word they would like to join. And then Jim, not only does he say he'll join, but he's got Wolf Portacio. We went to bed with 4, we woke up in the morning, and we added 3 overnight. And we walk into that meeting, and we basically tell them we're about to leave, and we're gonna go create our own project.
It's really hard to overstate just how big a deal this was at the time. Marvel and DC had no real competition.
Image was structured in such a way that the partners, we had 2 rules. You own everything you do, and you don't screw with the other partners. Now it was official. Now the only person that could say no to Todd was Todd. That was everything. That was Image to him, was the fact that he could do what he wanted, and he could make things as cool as he wanted, and no one could tell him no. One of our first meetings where we were all together, and before anyone knew what anyone was doing, sat around. It's like, so what's your book gonna be? Todd was like, oh yeah, I got this character, he's dead, he's from hell, he's all disfigured, and I'm calling him Spawn.
Issue number 1 was just gonna basically be the origin of this character that nobody knew who it was, called Spawn. And so I needed to basically set the table visually as to what this world was and that people would get around it. The original concept of Spawn was this guy who was in love with this woman and it's taken away from him. He just wants to go back and say goodbye one last time. Because of that, his whole life gets turned upside down. He makes literally the deal with the devil. That was easy for me to write. Would I make that deal? Of course I would, right? Would I want to come back and say goodbye to my Wanda? Of course I would. So we'll make it so that Spawn's saying goodbye to his Wanda. That book is essentially just a long-winded metaphor for a lot of things in my life.
Everything that drives Spawn ultimately is because he loves his wife so much, and he loves the family so much, and he will sacrifice anything to protect that. in reality, Todd would be the same way.
And now I go, this is the look of the character you bought. This is who Spawn is, and I hope that you guys will go for a ride here in the next little while.
When the first issue of Spawn came out, it was a game changer. Not only did the fans go crazy, but the professional side of the industry went crazy.
The first issue's cover was just gorgeous. I mean, the colors were unlike anything you'd seen before. The fine detail of his art was just popping in a way that you could only do when you controlled every aspect of production.
The horror elements of Spawn really made it stand out from not only all the other Image comics, but every comic book at the time. It was something that was completely unique.
It sold 1.7 million copies. To this day, it's still the top-selling indie comic of all time.
I guess the only time that things became a little shaky was when the industry started to implode.
Hello?
Miss Karen, this is Todd McFarlane. How are you doing?
Hi, okay.
Good. You need a bunch of my covers. If we're shooting for the second week of September, you need my covers when?
We were looking for those covers today.
Okay, today, so today is a long day. What, give me a time.
5 o'clock my time, 4 hours from now. But at that point, in reality, at that point, 5 o'clock, 10 o'clock tonight, it's the same thing as far as when it gets touched, as far as when covers can get built and plated for press. But I need something to get to press to start with.
We had a cliff yesterday, right? I guess we all knew about it. It didn't seem like we were acting about it. If we can't make something happen by their deadline, it means I gotta bump this book a week. The industry as a whole was starting to collapse because you could say that even in the heyday of Image comic books, there was a big speculator market.
The theory that as a collector, you could in some way amass wealth through comics led people to start buying everything, like every #1, every variant cover that every publisher decided, oh yeah, we'll make that hologram and we'll do that like tinfoil pressing and we'll do that, you know, whatever. And we got this artist to do this special thing. The bubble of the speculator market and the collector market and the reseller market began to wane because everybody who wanted a thing had a thing.
Throughout the early 90s comics boom, Image was really the engine driving the comic speculator market until fans realized all those #1 issues they were buying weren't worth anything.
It forced all of us to basically either take sort of stock of what we were doing or get desperate. And I saw both. I saw both, not only at Image, but at Marvel and DC.
And you're wondering who's going to survive? Is anybody going to survive? But you had to admire Todd's bullheadedness, right? It's Spawn, Spawn, Spawn all the time. He's stuck to Spawn. Even to this day, he sticks to Spawn.
And I thought I needed to put 4 pillars down. If I could put these 4 pillars down, then I could build a skyscraper. They were video games, TV, movies, toys.
When people talk about the movie and the animated series, those two properties really helped keep Spawn as a character relevant.
Loved the movie when it came out. Not too often you see, you know, African-American superheroes, so I was always really drawn to that.
I remember the movie, it conjured the feel that you wanted from the comics on the screen.
The movie made almost $100 million at the box office. Not bad 20 years before the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but the HBO series, it introduced Spawn to an entirely new audience.
I remember when the Spawn animated show came out on HBO, there were no other animated shows like it.
It was anime-level violence and maturity on an American cartoon that was really groundbreaking at the time. To have, you know, a weekly HBO show that was a superhero show, but was also laced with profanity and violence and all this insane stuff, and it's just mind-blowing.
I kept on saying, why aren't they doing this with everything?
Can I say that there wasn't a day where I said, I've got to start a toy company ever? There just become moments where I just go, if nobody's going to do it for me, I'll do it myself. Spawn sets records, Spawn's at the top of the charts. When you're at the top of the charts, people who are looking for ideas look at charts. I had conversations with all the Fortune 500 guys. What they were telling me they were going to do was just a repeat of what they had been doing with every other brand that they had had for the last 20, 30 years. Will they do R-rated toys? No. Will they do sort of scary content? No. Why? Because they're selling to 6-year-olds and moms.
Toys were super boring in the way that some comic book art in the 80s was super boring.
You'd look at them and go, what the heck? I could do better.
When he told us, I'm going to make Spawn toys, the rest of us were just thinking, wow, one of these days would be awesome if Hasbro would make an action figure from one of our creations that we own. Wouldn't that be cool? No, that wasn't good enough for Todd.
When Todd started the toy business, everybody said to Todd what you'd never say to Todd, you'll never do that. You'll never be able to do that.
He was going to personally go to all the places that were basically owned by Mattel, owned by Hasbro, and make a toy, and you're going to put it on your shelves. And all of us were like, really, that's what you're going to do? But he never doubted it.
You can really look at the toy industry as a whole and go, okay, here's how toys looked, and then McFarlane Toys started, and then here's how toys looked after that.
Todd completely changed the game in the adult collectible toys industry. It's a multi-billion-dollar business now, and it didn't really exist before McFarlane Toys.
Drawn to that, and some of the pieces he did of me in uniform was a real treat.
At times, I start corporations out of anger. I'll spend my money and do it at my company, and I'll do it any way I want, and then at least if I fail, it's on my merit.
There's stuff that comes up in life that's big and overwhelming that you have no choice about. You just have to figure out how to deal with it. But I remember saying, I'm really worried about this. I'm concerned that this is going to be too much.
Notoriety comes with a target. Today is officially 1 week away from deadline. And now the heat gets ratcheted up. What do you think? What's your first reaction on it?
First reaction to the 27 is he looks a little flat.
Yeah. Right now what he's got is he's got the color hold in the back and him solid in the front, and where I would almost flipped it.
It's been difficult. It's been very difficult. But we're family. You go through the fire every single day with every single one of these people. For whatever reason, when you're around McFarlane, things just work out. I know the sweat and the blood and the tears and everything that has gone into it. To be able to physically hold that issue in my hand is gonna be amazing. It's gonna be amazing.
Success, for the most part, comes usually with notoriety. Notoriety then comes with a target. Either the fans don't like you, you got critics, you got lawyers that are coming after you, want to start suing you.
Todd's been involved in some lawsuits through the years. You can't run a business and be as in the public eye as Todd is and not have people try to take down.
Todd definitely made some big mistakes along the way. In 1993, he named a mob boss in Spawn after a real-life NHL hockey player named Tony Twist. Tony Twist didn't like it, sued, and it wound up costing Todd millions. The Neil Gaiman lawsuit was over the rights to 3 characters Gaiman created in the Spawn comic. That suit not only cost Todd financially, his reputation also took a hit. He nearly lost everything.
Have I seen the view at the edge of the cliff? On more than one occasion.
Belief in what you're doing lets you weather just about everything. It's not going to be the money. It's not going to be the accolades. It's not going to be the fancy house with your Spawn office. It's not going to be any of that stuff. It's going to be, I believe in this story. And everything else, fine. Whatever. I'll take it.
Look, if you're an entrepreneur, you get to see over the edge of the cliff a couple of times. And sometimes if you don't watch out, you actually fall. That's how I learn, from my own stupidity. Just going, boof, you step in crap, you learn real quickly not to do it again. I want to be just like my dad, except I'm not going to get pushed around. You don't repeat history. That focus that I have can be a detriment to the point that I get so focused, I lose track of other things. I have 2 or 3 traits that are probably hyper developed, and then I've got others that are lagging way behind.
That piece of his personality transmits to other things. It is a challenge, you know, to be able to get him to be balanced.
Creative people are a unique breed. The blessing and the curse is that we've got these big imagination and lots of stuff is spinning in our head. That can be a marvelous thing when you see the end product, but it can be trying on others. I got the better end of the deal by far, right? So I'm guessing that I've given her plenty of times to pause as to sort of going, wow, 50 more years with the dude? Like, I think I can be tiresome. I think I can be weary. I think I can be aggravating and a pain, all of the above. So I'm amazed that she continues. That she continues to deal with it.
The significance of Todd McFarlane getting to tell the 300th Spawn story is that if you believe in yourself and your talent and the story and the work, you get to tell the story your way.
It's a really rare creator that can focus on one character and do it for decades. It's quite an achievement.
They're gonna always try and say, it's not possible, don't do it. Don't listen to them.
Hey, here's a dude who made up a thing in his room and thought it was super cool. And now there's cartoons and there's video games and there's feature films and there's all of this stuff. Oh, that guy just built this tiny empire based on that one character. That is how the next person who grew up reading comics and playing video games decides, oh, I can do that too.
I would not have been as gung-ho about doing my own projects and paving my own way if it hadn't been for the example that Todd had set.
Any of us that are able to climb some level of success, can you use that power now to try to inspire others to go, you become the next wave. Come on.
Everything that he's done, it's always pushing boundaries. It's always pushing boundaries, and he's not stopping.
Todd puts no limits on himself, and I think that's kind of the secret with him, and I think that's what people can learn from Todd, really. It doesn't matter if you fail. That's not the point.
He takes this insane work ethic, this drive to push boundaries, do things in a little different way, but always be there for the fans, and I think that's kind of the key to his success.
His fans are the most important thing to him because he is very, very aware that without them, he wouldn't be still doing this.
They gave you their hard-earned money to have a career. We owe everything to the fan.
People are like, oh, you work for McFarlane? Oh yeah, you know, that Spawn #1 issue was my favorite. It was so cool. I still have it.
What do you want out of life? What is it that drives you in life? How are you going to have a happy life? I think that's what Todd has always understood.
After 27 years of doing this character, I'm just getting warmed up. We're trying to get the Spawn movie off the ground, which I direct. We've done a lot of pre-production, we're ready. We're just waiting for the one final big check so we can just go. I am relentless, I'm like a dog with a bone. I will get there. But ultimately, in all honesty, I think I'm gonna come full circle. I think if you were to ask me, where do you see yourself when you're 80, 90, if you're doing anything creative, I think I'm just gonna be a comic book guy. And I'll just draw on paper like I did when I was 16. I won't be 22-year-old trying to make a career and trying to get noticed and trying to do all these things that you're fighting for on top of it. I'll just be able to draw for the joy of drawing because I like to draw.